when you get real and get honest and you face God and face your partner, something beautiful starts to happen. You start to introduce grace.
It's so amazing how God gives you more blessings than you can even imagine when you do His will.
When they start looking through that lens of the atonement through the life experiences, it doesn't change how hard that experience is, but it changes how they process it, and then it allows them to grow from it.
Hello and welcome to Latter-day Profiles. We're here in St. George, Utah today, and joining me today is Geoff Steurer. Jeff, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Jeff is a licensed marriage and family therapist, has a practice here in St. George. Also, if you do a Google search, you see a lot of articles he's written for Meridian Magazine and also here in St. George. A co-author of a book, Love You, Hate the Porn, Healing a Relationship Damaged by Virtual Infidelity. He and his wife Judy do a podcast, Crisis to Communication, you can check out as well. All focused on helping individuals and couples heal when there's been things such as pornography or infidelity, and trying to get those relationships mended, which is a great thing to do and a difficult thing to do as well. But let's do a little bit of your background. If you tell me you're from Oklahoma, a little bit about growing up in Oklahoma, what was life like for you?
Oh, it's a great place to grow up. I grew up in a small town that had, I think we had like 2,000 people in town. So just a small community, small high school. And it was just a great place. We lived out in the country, and my siblings and I there were just a few of us that were members of the church in our high school. So it was a really great opportunity to really get clear on what I believe and what I value, and we just really enjoyed the pace and the life out there. It's just a great place to live. And so, so I graduated from high school out there, and I found my way to BYU eventually.
I served a mission. Was it Dominican Republic? Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
Oh, it was fantastic, yeah. Third world country, the people were just fabulous. It was such an adventure. Got to learn Spanish, ate a lot of great food. It was just a really lovely place to serve. Yeah.
So you ended up back at BYU, and where did you meet your wife? Did you meet her at BYU?
Yeah, we met at BYU. Actually, I was lucky enough to get her before she left after she graduated. She was graduating right when I met her, and like 3 weeks away from graduation. So we got married in 1996 and have 4 kids. And yeah.
Awesome. When did you settle down here in St. George? When did that happen?
So we moved here. I started my career in Arizona, in northeastern Arizona, and then we moved here in 2006. Felt like we should be here. I opened a private practice here. So we've been here ever since, raised our kids here.
What got you interested in this area of study? Did you have that intention when you were at BYU?
Oh, not at all. No. No, but it's funny, you look back and you can see a lot of the pieces that came together, and even that perhaps I had some interest in this type of thing even when I was in high school. I look back and I remember in high school I had written a term paper in my senior year on post-traumatic stress disorder. And one of my science fair projects, instead of doing, building bridges with toothpicks, I was doing surveys on gender roles and just things like that. I must have had an interest in that from an early age. And I grew up in a large family, 6 kids, and so there's always dynamics and relationships and stuff that I just think there's a natural interest in that. But my undergraduate degree is in communication studies, so I thought I was going to be a journalist. And I had a real interest in stories and people, and I just really was so interested in just the world and what was going on. And it was my junior year when my wife and I moved next door to Wally and Nancy Goddard, and he was a family life professor out in Auburn University. Oh. And Stephen Covey had hired him to come out and help him write his 7 Habits for Highly Effective Families. And we became neighbors and started talking a lot about marriage and family. And it was like this light bulb went off for me. And in those conversations, I really started to recognize that this is what I wanted to do. And then discovered that marriage and family therapy was that track that I wanted to go down.
So you ended up going to Auburn, correct?
Yeah. I just blame it on Wally. I'm like, you must have written a really great letter for me. So I ended up at Auburn University and did my master's degree there.
What was that experience like for you? And did you kind of find a home in what you were studying? Felt like you went home, I guess, when you're studying that kind of stuff?
Yeah. My undergraduate work was great, and I felt like I was, the further you get into it, I feel like the more engaged you get with the topic. But just from go with my master's degree, I just felt like I just looked forward to every class. Probably not statistics, but everything else, all the family studies class, child development, marriage and family systems. I mean, all those things were just, I did really well in my classes because I just loved it so much. It was the kind of thing where I felt like it was just such a good fit for me.
What's the process of becoming a licensed therapist? Obviously, you get your degree, and what are the steps you have to go through?
Yeah, you have to get a master's degree, and then there's like a supervisory period where you have to do a certain amount of hours. Every state's different, but it's in the thousands of hours. So it's basically full-time work as a therapist for a couple of years. And when you put in your time under supervision, reviewing cases, watching video, really getting a sense that you're ethical, that you're effective, then you take a state licensing exam, and you move from kind of that associate status into a fully licensed therapist. And then every year you have to keep up with your continuing education credits and things like that. Yeah.
And tell me, as you get into this, I mean, there's obviously lots of areas that you could focus on when you're doing some counseling and therapy. How did this one come about? Was it here's problems you're seeing, I can help with that, or what was the chicken and the egg? What got you there?
Yeah, I think some students go into their graduate studies knowing where they want to work. That wasn't me. I went in and left school and just wanted to work as a therapist. So I ended up at this small rural mental health community in northeastern Arizona, and just worked with everything, children, adults, just kind of cradle to grave, everything.
Sure.
But as I was doing it, I noticed that the children I was working with, I really wanted to get my hands on their parents, specifically their marriages, and realized that really was a fountainhead for so many issues in the family. When the marriage was unstable, when there were issues between the husband and wife, it sent a shockwave down to the kids. And so I would often call the parents in, to do family therapy, but it was like there was so much there to work with that I really took an interest in doing couples work. And this was in the early 2000s when the internet, of course, and broadband were becoming more prominent. So we started seeing a lot more cases of people struggling with pornography issues and infidelity. And with the internet, of course, there's so many ways you can get in trouble.
Sure, yeah.
And introduce, even in a small community like that, things that perhaps you would only see in a big city historically. And so a lot of the cases were coming to me like that, and I had no idea how to help them. I didn't know what to do. I'd never had any training in graduate school for dealing with these things. So I sought out additional training, and I started to specialize in this. And then when I moved to St. George, that was the specialty I chose to focus on, and there was just a lot of need. And so...
as you go through, partly being a member of the church, very important thing that gets talked about a lot. How do those two, roles run together as far as your faith and then also into your counseling and the therapy that you do?
Yeah, I think as members of the church, we take our covenants pretty seriously. We believe in monogamy, fidelity, and building strong marriages and families. And so this is very near and dear to me as a married person, but also as a member of the church, and to many of the clients I work with, many who are LDS. And so I think that intersection is a big part of why people seek out help there, because they know that they can't do this on their own, and they have an eternal perspective. They know that this isn't something that's going to be a quick fix, and they want to make sure it's going to last forever. And I think people want deeper healing. And so I think there's a real interest in this area now. I certainly don't believe that everybody that has looked at pornography or that struggles with these things that they're just so deeply ruined and addicted and they're never going to get healing. In fact, it's the opposite. Anyone who wants to heal from whatever level of struggle they have can do it. It's not terminal, not at all.
And that's always good to hear.
Yeah.
As you're going about this, how do people find you? So obviously, some people will seek you out. Do others maybe come kicking and screaming with a spouse? How does that work when people first come to you and they're looking for some help?
Yeah, so thankfully I've had some great opportunities. I started writing for a couple of different online publications and even newspapers here locally, writing advice columns. And so my work, my responses, people got a real feel for the kind of answers I would give and my take on things. And of course, a lot of it's hard to answer somebody's question from just a few hundred words, but you do your best. And I think there's been a lot of reception to the work I've done over the years with answering questions, and for Meridian Magazine in a gospel context especially. And then I think podcasting, and I've spoken at conferences, and I try and do a lot of public speaking and help educate and offer hope. So I think that's how people find me. And then of course word of mouth. People, when you've been doing this a long time,
Yeah.
people, you build trust and people know your work. But yeah, a lot of people come in. I think primarily the person who's been betrayed is more motivated. They're hurting. They often have a lot of the push to fix this because to them it's brand new. They're in shock. They're in trauma. And the person who's broken the trust or betrayed the trust, they've known probably that they need help or that there's issues there. But a lot of times there's so much shame and it can be very embarrassing and humiliating to have to seek treatment. They feel like in some ways they're, going to the principal's office, if you will,
Sure.
or that they're going to be shamed or scorned for what they've done. And I think most find that when they come in, it's an invitation to be their best self and to heal. And so many of them just get disconnected from their values. And there's a lot of good work we can do with that.
I read some of your articles and some things that you worked with. And one thing that was interesting to me was, especially if someone's hiding something, then the act of hiding is almost worse or equal to whatever was done, whether it was infidelity or whether it was pornography. And then you're working on mending those barriers between the two. Give us just some insights on when you start working with, these, let's take couples, for example, how you start to mend those barriers. And I imagine everyone's different, of course, but.
Yeah, it really does surprise people that the cover-up is more painful than the behavior that they were trying to cover up. Now, I'm not gonna, for everybody it's different, but for the most part, most of the people I've worked with, most couples, especially the betrayed partners, they know, they understand that we're human and that we oftentimes want things that aren't good for us. And a lot of them had made mistakes in their own lives. And so it's rare that I ever get someone that comes in and they're just in shock that their husband or their wife is human. They know that they've made mistakes. But the cover-up part, the part of active deception, where maybe the crossing the line or whatever the behaviors were that were causing problems, where that it might have happened once or twice, or it may take minutes or hours. The secrecy is happening 100% of the time, every day, day and night, keeping that secret, that distance, and those walls start to get built up. To a lot of betrayed partners, it feels cruel. It can even feel abusive. Like, you've allowed me to live my life knowing just a portion of what I need to know to make decisions, and you've been in control of that. That's where the damage is, and it's very destructive. So part of the big part of the healing comes from starting to tell the truth. We do focus a lot, especially when there's been secretive behaviors. There's an emphasis on disclosure. There's an emphasis on speaking up and telling your story and getting honest. That's been a part of the 12-step tradition from Alcoholics Anonymous. And all major religions at least emphasize some form of confession. Sure. Coming out of hiding, speaking the truth. I mean, even Adam and Eve in the garden, just getting honest and stepping out in the light is a huge part of our healing as people. This is good for our souls. We get congruent, we get aligned. And without that, we really can't feel safe with another person if they don't have all the information and don't know kind of who we are, if you will, what our character is. And one thing I'll say about that is the process of telling the truth does so many other things besides just the information. It allows you to develop courage. It allows you to develop a capacity to sit with discomfort, compassion for your partner, empathy, all these things that will actually lead to building a strong relationship long term.
It seemed to me there's been I would call it maybe the perfect storm. So early 2000s, internet, smartphones come around really close by, social standards modified. So now you've got this kind of perfect storm. I can seek people out online that I never would have talked to before. Right. I can find things online I never could have found before. And I can do it on a small phone anywhere I want. As you're working with folks, I guess, what are some of the things that you tell them? Number one, I guess maybe we could talk about youth or whatnot, how to try and train up so you use those devices correctly. And then, of course, once you're in that, then we can talk about successfully finding ways to eliminate that from your life or control.
Yeah, you're right, there's such a proliferation of technology access and things that we never could have dreamed of years ago. Those of us who grew up before these devices, we remember a time where you had to really look to get in trouble. And now it's not like that. So it's easy to fixate on the devices and even maybe blame the devices. And I certainly think that they introduce a lot of elements that we didn't used to have. But so much of this is about emotional regulation. So much of this is really about learning how to understand and deal with our own reflexes and urges to check out, to numb, to mood alter, to escape. So much of spirituality, so much of connecting and being a healthy person, both interpersonally and with God and so on, involves recognizing when we need something and filling that with something healthy. And the challenge with devices, especially smartphones, is that it gives us an instant solution to almost any discomfort. And that can be social media, that can be just checking the news while we're waiting in line at the bank. We can mood alter so quickly with these devices. And so that's what I would say to parents and even to adults, is recognize that these devices are wonderful tools. They also can train us to have a very low tolerance for discomfort. And we will reach for things that perhaps don't fill us or that leave us more empty or maybe more distracted and disconnected from ourselves, from those around us. So I think the goal ultimately is to learn how to use these devices in ways that serve us so we're not serving them.
I think it's interesting if, so a couple come together, honesty is hard, I think, sometimes.
It's hard.
So that's very discomforting. So if you're, getting ready to move on to marriage, you've had some issues. Do I reveal those? You feel uncomfortable, it's hard. And maybe you enter into that marriage and you haven't revealed those things. And at some point, maybe just like you talked about, is it primarily that discomfort of telling the truth that really gets in the way?
Yeah, the fear, I think, of being rejected. None of us want to be alone. It's uncomfortable. We're hardwired to stay in the group, just as humans. And so, of course, we don't. If I've got a secret life, or if I've got a past, or things that I'm ashamed of or embarrassed of, it's a natural human thing. Again, from the Garden of Eden, to just want to pretend that things aren't happening that are actually happening.
Yeah.
And so we have that tendency. But in a dating context, I think it's really powerful to start off the relationship as one, to really know the same information. In fact, for couples that I'm working with, when there's been a coming forward, when there's been a voluntary disclosure, before the partner has ever caught anything, those couples do tend to fare much better because they don't have to overcome that critical precedent of the truth is going to come out because I want it to come out. I'm committed to truth. I want this healing. I don't want this in my life, versus the only reason you're doing this work is because I caught you.
Yeah.
So if you have that chance to do that, whether you're married or certainly if you're dating, to reveal and talk about the struggles, it's amazing how much of the time that's met with deep compassion, understanding, maybe some fear and some struggle, but those are great things to talk about and work through. Builds intimacy.
Let's talk about success stories, because oftentimes we dwell on,
I know,
there's problems, right? There's problems. We all know that there's problems, but our people do get through this, and they come out on
That's
the
right.
other side, and maybe it's always going to be a struggle, but at least you can be on top of things. And as people are working through this, tell me about some of the success story, kind of obviously not with individuals, but how do they work through that, and how is it successful for them? How do they make it through and give people some hope that, yes, I can do this, I can make it through this difficult?
Yeah, I couldn't get up every day if this wasn't working.
Yeah.
I mean, people do get better, thankfully, and change is possible. And so much of what works for why people change, a lot of it comes down to, some of the fruits of the Spirit, right? So humility, and I would say just trust in God, trust in another person. It takes a lot of trust to open up and be honest. It takes a lot of humility to accept the feedback and look at your life honestly. The people that succeed in this, the people that do good long-term work, first of all, are just deeply accountable. They recognize that they're human, they've made mistakes, they get real about it. There's a humility, a curiosity, a willingness to understand and be compassionate towards your partner and the impact you've had on them. For betrayed partners, they learn how to speak up, ask for what they need. They're not just holding their breath and hoping everything gets better. They're an active part of that process of advocating for a partnership type marriage. They're advocating for truth and honesty and connection. Couples that really do that kind of work over a long period of time will find themselves on the other side of this. And in most cases, they end up having a way better marriage. I don't want people limping along for the rest of their lives, just getting through the day, just hoping that they'll make it to some finish line. I want people to recognize that it's possible to have a vibrant, intimate, deeply connected marriage. And I'll tell you, it's so deeply rewarding to, just be in town or to get emails occasionally, run into people who give me their follow-up story 5, 10 years later. I mean, I've been in this community in particular for 15, 17 years. And, it's a long time. People that I've worked with over the years circle back and talk about what's worked and how things are better. And it's just so deeply satisfying to see that when people do the work, things get better. It's absolutely possible. It's not, like I said, it's not something that's, terminal. There's absolutely principles and steps that you can take to heal.
If someone were watching this and they're thinking, they're hesitant, right? They've got some issues going on, afraid, and maybe even thinking, yeah, that sounds good, but maybe not for me, kind of thing. What would you tell those people that probably could really use the help, but just really don't want to?
That first of all, I understand. I mean, it's very scary to reach out and get help. That's a very natural thing. Again, it's a human reflex to hide. It's a human reflex to deny. It's a human reflex to just want to make sure everything just goes away and we don't have to deal with something so deeply uncomfortable. But in the same way, again, I'll go back to Adam and Eve. I've referenced it a few times. It's a beautiful story of our beginning as humans. It's when you come out of hiding, when you get real and get honest and you face God and face your partner, something beautiful starts to happen. You start to introduce grace. Yes, there's hard work to do. There's trust to be rebuilt. There's painful feelings. But you start to enlist a support that you didn't have available when you're in isolation by yourself. So many people try and heal alone in isolation by themselves, and they can only get so far. And that's a very lonely place. And so I would just encourage people to trust that there is grace, there is goodness, there's healing on the other side, even if there's consequences. Like President Hinckley once said, he said, God is always forgiving and sometimes life isn't forgiving. And that's a real thing. Sometimes we can't protect ourselves from the consequences, but there's absolutely healing if people step out and do the work.
One of the things I think would be interesting, you started doing a podcast with your wife, Jody. Obviously when you're working with clients, you're not disclosing anything, but now you can talk about your work and you can talk about it with your wife. I think that must be a fun aspect that you could actually talk about what you're doing and share that information through a podcast.
That's why I brought her on. And that's why the podcast From Crisis to Connection, we wanted to talk about so much of the work I've done in my practice has been around the crisis stuff. But my wife and I, from the beginning of our marriage, were introduced to a lot of principles around healthy connection, around what builds successful relationships from our mentors and just living life and being married for 27 plus years. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to have her on. We've talked about my work and we've talked about the type of stuff I've done, and she's been along for the ride the whole time. So to have her as a co-host commentator, and she's just done her own work and she's lived in her own family relationships and friendships, and she brings so much to the table. It's just lovely to have her there as a woman and as my wife and as a witness to so much of this work that we've all done over the years. It's really a fun conversation.
Clearly, this is something you're passionate about, helping others. What is it about that get you up in the morning and say, hey, I'm going to go help people what is it that really motivates you with this work that you do?
I just believe that good relationships really are, that's to me, that's the pinnacle of what I think we seek as humans is being securely attached to each other, being securely attached to God. When all those things are working, everything in life feels so much easier. Everything just feels possible. I think it just opens up so much potential as individuals. We grow more as individuals when we're securely connected. So to me, relationships are everything. And getting them right is not easy. It's difficult. Living in relationships isn't easy. We're different people. We have different needs, temperaments. But when we learn the principles and really learn how to apply them, and we do the work, and we're willing to struggle and really just sacrifice and impact each other in these ways, boy, I just think it's one of the most satisfying things. It's what we aspire to as Latter-day Saints. We want to live in families. We want to live in relationships. We talk about a father in heaven, a mother in heaven. We talk about these family relationships. So I just want to help people get it right, and I want to get it right in my own life.
Jeff Steurer, you can find him online. Done a lot of writing for Meridian Magazine, also here in St. George. You can look at some local articles, Geoff Steurer, and we'll have a written on the screen so you can see it. And check out your website. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, Jeff, and thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Jeff.